Testing. All right, here we go. We are live. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Engineering Lounge. We have had some technical difficulties, mostly due to the fact that I can't use technology, but we are recording now. It is great to see you all. I'm here with my regular co-host, Camy. Camy, good afternoon.
Hi, James. Hi, everyone.
And we have a very special guest with us, my good friend, Darragh McCarthy. Darragh.
Oh, I'm very special. That's a nice to know. I wouldn't say technical difficulty, James. It's really just your natural QA talent coming out to find glitches in the software.
I am a bug magnet. Yes.
Yeah. I remember you lodging a bug with Hell Pizza once. That was pretty good.
I did. I don't know if it's a story for today, but I did. I had it all reproduced. I sent them videos and everything. Yeah, I do love what I do.
Yep, it's good.
Yeah. Hey, I guess before we get too deep into anything, maybe Darragh, you want to introduce yourself to the rest of the world?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Darragh. I work for Xero. I've been there about 10 months now, which doesn't feel like a long time, but also feels like a long time. I am a development manager at Xero. So I'm responsible for the overall engineering, strategy, practice, delivery, and engineer well-being in my teams. I've also been focused on a lot of scaling. So the team I look after when I joined had 4 engineers and now we're at 28. So that's a lot of rapid scale in 10 months. And also very relevant for today's conversation, a huge chunk of my team is located in the US. So remote working is something that I think about a lot and try to put effort into. Let's see how the conversation goes today, whether I've put enough in.
Cool. And that's a great segue. So today we wanted to explore this idea of remote working and how to build a good engineering culture remotely. Unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that the world has changed significantly thanks to COVID. And a lot of people in tech have now gone remote or some sort of hybrid working. And we thought it'd be a good idea to explore, some of the challenges that change brings with it. So I guess a good starting point is sort of fully remote, in office, some sort of hybrid. What are you doing and what do you prefer to do?
So obviously for me, as I just talked about, a kind of part of my team is fully remote because they're distributed amongst the US. So not even all in one office in the US. Actually, I say US, also have several team members in Canada as well. So they're fully remote. We do try get together when we can, but for the most part, that's a remote team. And we have one pod located in Auckland that I would say is hybrid. So they're in the office sometimes, not others. Some members of the team choose to come in every day. And Xero as a whole has a hybrid, or at least in Auckland has a hybrid model. So people are kind of free to do what works best for their team. And I see that across the spectrum. You've got some teams that I see in the office, all of them basically every time I go in. And then there's people I work with who I haven't seen in 6 months because they never come in. So people are kind of changing it to fit them, which is kind of, I think, the next thing we were going to talk about was kind of the advantages around that, I imagine. For some people, that's pretty helpful if they live far away or they've got kids, remote commuting, all of that. But it does lack that social element, I think, that everyone talks about. So I feel like that's kind of where hybrid working gets attacked a lot. It's like that culture word people use. It's like, oh, we're lacking the culture now. Where's the culture?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's interesting because you sort of talked about hybrid.
Yeah.
But some people don't come in at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can talk about any of the spectrum we want to talk about today. So the fully remote, the engineers that are hybrid, they're choosing to be hybrid because of their being because of they're co-located and they have the option. And even some of my US teams choose to be hybrid. Some people like to come in, and the ones who are hybrid kind of choose that for that cultural element, kind of the socializing, getting to see people, get out of the house, especially some of them who in the Auckland office have kind of joined Xero for that kind of Xero famous culture, and they want to be part of the teams and the Friday drinks and the kind of social things happening in the office. And other people are just, happy enough to just be working I'm working on, like as a team together, and not having to come into the office and sit on the bus for hours and deal with all of that. So it's definitely I feel the way the world has gone, office versus hybrid is, or hybrid more so, because if you're office you have to be in all the time, but hybrid and remote, it's kind of people are choosing their roles and the jobs and the teams to fit what they need, from a personal point of view, where they're at in their life. And I kind of really like that. I like that people can adapt. And same way, what's one thing that's come with remote and hybrid working is the flexible working hours as well. Because you don't need to be in 9 to 5. And you're working people remotely, and we're moving to a lot of asynchronous communication and things. There's no actual need to be on 9 to 5. So you can go for a run at lunchtime and come back and do some hours in the evening, as fits your lifestyle. And I think that's kind of, I guess, one of the silver linings that's come out of the last few years with COVID, is that people are able to adopt their lifestyle to hopefully fit a better work-life balance.
I've got a question though. So I'm assuming
Yeah.
the entire remote time they're working according to New Zealand hours, right?
No. I actually was really, really vocal about making sure that people work the hours of the time zone that they're in. So my US team are all working PST hours. So some of them are working slightly a bit differently because they're based in the Denver region and they're working maybe till 6 instead of 5. But they're working PST hours, and then the New Zealand team are working New Zealand hours. If a team member wants to slightly adjust their hours to start a bit earlier, or finish a bit later in order to work more with their teammates, I support that. But there's no expectation on anyone to work outside of their hours. Because for me, work-life balance is super important for the team. I kind of hinted at it there before. And I think forcing someone to start getting up at 5 a.m. or work till 8 p.m. to work with their team is unfair. And it's not the way I want my team to run. I want people to enjoy their jobs. And that's a quick way to have people resent their roles.
Yeah. So is it like 2 times, or the same time that is distributed across US and New Zealand?
So it's the same team, but multiple pods. So we've got 4 pods. So some of the pods are distributed though. So there's some pods that have people here and in the US. And yes, there's a little crossover thanks to daylight savings at the moment. So when things come around again in a few weeks, it'll be much easier for us. We'll get, I think, 5 hours of crossover. At the moment, we've got 3, which can be rough. It means a lot of, my mornings are insanely busy. I have a lot of meetings, and trying to schedule stuff gets difficult. But we make it work, and that kind of comes to the communication models, like moving more to asynchronous communication, not relying on meetings, questioning whether this can be a meeting or not, and then which has actually resulted in some really good cultural stuff. Again, one of the positives of remote working is the document first culture. Like, hey, let's make sure that we're capturing our decisions, writing down design decisions, actually keeping track of these things, because we're not in the meetings with each other, but also forces that it's a more inclusive model for those who wouldn't have been in the meeting in the first place and now have visibility on what's going on. Would I say my team is knocking it out of the park with this? No, we've got ways to grow. It's been a growth focus area for us all, of like, hey, make sure, like, it's very easy to have a conversation and go cool and then not write it down, because it takes effort to go and type up that Confluence doc. But it definitely helps a lot. And it's a lot of our early challenges as a team were due to misalignments, and most of that came back to, hey, no one actually wrote down this decision and people are all confused about what we're doing.
That Cammy's about to say something, so I don't want to cut her off.
That is actually so cool to hear, because all of my experience is in banking, and I haven't heard that if banks are allowing people like remotely work from other countries. Like, I think they've just started hiring like across New Zealand, so now we have teams that are distributed all across New Zealand. But Xero is clearly leading the way, and Darragh, you're doing an amazing job for sure.
Well, we're lucky that we already had a internationally distributed team with Xero, so we've got offices all over the world, in the US, especially. And actually, the team that I work with, the kickstart for the team was a purchase of another company in November of last year called Locate, which is based in California. So we kind of had no option from the start to expand their team in that area. But yes, no, we're definitely lucky that we have that advantage.
You have touched on something interesting.
Yep.
In terms of like one of my big challenges is the async stuff, and we're a little bit remote even pre-COVID. We had one employee in Australia, which is a pretty palatable time zone difference in terms of it's a couple of hours out, but even that was becoming difficult because all our things were synchronous. and moving to asynchronicity is the right thing to do. You like that? But but is challenging, right? Changing those habits is really, really hard. We start with, a classic mistake I make is, we need to write something down. So I'll fire some Slack messages off, which is not the right thing. And so it's not just that, it's also agreement on how you're going to write stuff and that sort of thing, right?
So that is a challenge that we faced. We had all these different communication tools, and people were using them in different ways. And the team that I run, as I hinted at there, is based off an acquisition. So this had been planned for a long time, and this is all in the public domain. Don't worry, I'm not going to hopefully get in trouble for mentioning that. So the acquisition itself was planned for a long time. So there'd been a lot of work gone in with a lot of other people. So there was a lot of information that was there, but kind of not accessible to us joining the team. It was a lot of like, oh yeah, that's on a Miro board somewhere, or that's often just Google Doc. And it's like, how do you find that? So we actually did some alignment work and actually created a framework and made it clear of like, here's our tools and here's what we use them for. Like docs are for like drafts of things. Miro is for whiteboarding sessions. And we kind of made Confluence a source of truth. I know a lot of us don't love Confluence as a tool, but as a wiki tool, it's the best we got. And making it the source of truth, like even if it's just linking off to other sources, at least so it's searchable. And if you're trying to find if the information exists in the first place, it's there. I feel James is about to bash Confluence there.
No, now that I've used some tools that are not Xero and Confluence, I really like Xero and Confluence, despite their trappings. I
actually thought it was gonna get like you were gonna say I have used something that is better than Xero and Confluence, and I was like what? Tell me about it.
Yeah, that was actually some of the biggest pushback when I tried to push this communication model, and was like, oh, I hate Confluence. Like that was basically the response. It was kind of like, okay, yeah, but it's the best thing we've got. But yeah, like it's, as you say, James, it's a challenge because documenting is the first challenge, but the other kind of bigger challenge is document discovery. So just writing it down is not enough. It has to be in a place that you can find it. Like, because what good is it doing otherwise?
Yeah, but also like documentation as code as well. I think like that's something that I have a big focus on, and probably like your teams do it too. Like once the information is in a bit better state, it's a bit solid, then you can actually push it to Git or Stash instead of putting it on Confluence. And I think that ensures the life cycle of the information and like version controlled and stuff like that's way well managed. Do you guys do that, Darragh?
Yeah, it depends on what you're talking about documenting. So in terms of like technical specifics, obviously that ends up being documented through code and close to it. It's what for me is important for documenting, and it's more to do with the level I operate at, is decisions and why we were making decisions and what criteria went into those decisions, because we get challenged on it all the time, or we challenge ourselves. And like we'll come back to something 6 months ago, or since we did 6 months ago, and say, hey, why did we do this? And you forget why. And having it written down of like, oh, we did this because we were in a rush at the time and we knew we'd come back to it. Great, cool. That criteria has changed. I can update this, versus that kind of constant fear that past you knew something that current you doesn't. So you're terrified of changing stuff. And that's not helpful for teams. And I've seen that in multiple companies I've worked in, of like that fear of change, where kind of information allows you to unlock that and kind of break your chains. Yeah. Sorry, that was a terrible metaphor.
We got it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
But so, with the challenge that you're on, or the journey that you're on, James, where are you at in terms of asynchronous? It's just trying to capture documentation in general, or is it remove meetings from the calendar?
It's a little bit of both. We're actually doing pretty good at writing stuff down. But I still often find myself, like say design docs, for example, giving lots of asynchronous feedback and then going, we just need a meeting about this. And I'm not sure where the line is there, At some point I think it needs to be synchronous, but how do you gauge that?
Yeah, agreed. There is conversations that can spiral out of control in asynchronous that you have to be careful about. And asynchronous also, when you're giving feedback, you have to be super careful, or even having conversations in Slack. Especially myself and you, James, as people leaders, you have to be really, really, but really across the whole team, be really, really careful about the words we use. And like not just like I've been caught many times early into my career of like just kind of flippantly saying something and not thinking how it could be interpreted. Where now I'm usually very careful about the tone I take in a Slack message, even a really simple one. I might reread it 3 or 4 times to make sure it can be misinterpreted by a report.
Yeah. Things like a tone of voice doesn't come through Slack, right? Just, and you've got to be real careful with that.
Yeah, and that's why like I kind of almost use overly happy language when I'm communicating people on Slack, and emojis and things like that are definitely helpful for it. But you have to be careful with emojis as well, because if people misinterpret the message, the emoji itself could be seen as a sarcastic emoji. I think like sending a message that is received badly and then a smiley face can kind of hurt you more.
Yeah, that is actually such a good point. Like, I think that's what I do as well, because I was working for a startup last year, Trove, and they had people working like from overseas, which was pretty cool to say. And they heavily relied on Slack, which was amazing, because right now where I am at a bank, we use Teams, and I think Teams definitely sucks. Slack is definitely better.
We could do a whole series on that.
We will.
Yeah.
Yes, for that time. So two things that I always like keep in mind with asynchronous communication is the clarity and kindness. And as long as you can bake in clarity, like what's the intent of your message, and be as kind as possible and polite, I think that always wins, like at least in my experience. Yeah, I mean, even though on the inside I'm just like very angry, but you just kind of like take a step back, and if you need to step away for like 10-15 minutes, do that, process it, and then come back and give the other person the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's actually an advantage we have asynchronous communication, that we're prevented from having that knee-jerk reaction as leaders. We kind of have to take a second and think through what we're writing, and maybe even walking away and getting a cup of coffee and coming back and realizing, like, taking that other approach. Because like I definitely been caught in having saying the wrong thing in meetings as well. So it's not purely asynchronous communication that I can accidentally ruffle feathers, I will say. But like it's the thing with asynchronous, or the thing with limited meeting time as well, and pushing it to asynchronous, is it's not limited to just writing documents and design. Like videos and things like that work quite well as well. Like for example, I have my teams doing jog days. Are you both familiar with the concept of jog days?
No.
Sorry, bit of a tangent. A jog day is basically when you work in sprints all the time, you're constantly sprinting. A jog day is either between sprints or sometimes in the middle of the sprints, depending on the time. You have a day where you jog, and it's a professional development day essentially, maybe targeted depending on what you're doing. But it's a day that, like, hey, I don't want to see anyone writing any production code today. Today is about you. But when I kind of announced that to my team, especially because I've got quite a large team now, kind of getting everyone together felt quite complicated. So I actually made a video about it. I talked them through, I made a presentation, I talked them through all the findings and how we came up with it. And it worked quite well. And then actually afterwards, we had an artifact. I didn't even think about it. I kind of just thought of it as a tool of like, hey, I can share this with the team, save me having to get everyone in a meeting. But we've actually had new people join since then and go, what's this jog day thing? And I'm like, oh, well, funny you ask. Here's the video you can watch and find all about it. So there's lots of other options we have for tooling asynchronous. We just possibly have to be a bit more creative.
Yeah.
The recordings one is good. We have a bi-weekly sort of technical leads meeting that anyone can dial into, but it's a time suck, and a lot of people will actually take the recording, watch it at 1.5 speed, and just kind of look through it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I should be offended that people are watching me at 1.5 speed. I hope everyone has this recording, slowed down to savor the time with us. But that's a thing too, right? You can actually get through it in your own time at your own speed.
The trick is to just be like me and speak fast enough that at double speed, no one's going to know what you're saying, so they have no option but to slow it down.
So funny, because I speak real fast, and in comparison to me, James speaks slow. So I wonder how our viewers are coping. That is actually such a good point, though, Darragh. Like recording all of this stuff, right? Like at BNZ, we record majority of our guild and chapter meetings, which is amazing, because then I can just like because it's not always possible to attend every guild and chapter meeting. But when it comes to our team, like my squad, we don't record those because that's kind of like quite specific to my squad. And I think recording, like people do hesitate a little bit. Like if you're being recorded, now you cannot have like all the banter that you would have. And it takes away a little bit of autonomy from the team. You have to be a bit careful about like when you record and when choose not to record.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to create safe spaces for your team, and to be open. And recording every meeting is going to erode that completely. I do think there's certain things that are really good to record, though. For example, we're onboarding a lot of people. We have been for the last few months, and recording onboarding sessions is great because now you're not having to explain the same block of code to 10 people. You've got an artifact, and you allow you to scale when you future want to scale on board, or talking people through the concepts of the product or anything like that. Those kind of sessions are amazing when you record them. Like they're super helpful. And even when I started at Xero, there was a few of those recordings from other products and things like that. And I found it super helpful to just figure out what was going on. And also, even if you're in those meetings in the first place, having the recording for you yourself to go back and be like, hey, they mentioned something during my onboarding, but a lot of information got thrown at me. I can go back and look at it and go, oh, okay, that makes sense. So that is one of the advantage of remote working for sure, that we have that option. Because obviously in the office, it doesn't happen. But I think we've talked a lot about positives of remote. Maybe we should pivot towards some of the kind of struggles, I would say.
Yes.
Time zones is one that we've kind of touched on, but the other is that one that I kind of started talking about at the start, which is culture, which is that like people always target like, oh, if we're not in the office all the time, culture goes down the drain. Culture is the problem. And I think what they mean by culture, because culture can mean a lot of things, is that personal connection that teams have, and that kind of friendship. And that is hard. For me, one of the kind of big turning points of remote working was that realization that it's different. Like it is different. I think a lot of companies and teams go down that route of trying to recreate what they had in the office and then being disappointed that it's not exactly the same, but just recognizing it's different and then trying to build something different from that. And yeah, is probably a better place to start. But there is like something you definitely lose is that, casual conversation connection. Like I caught up with someone over coffee, or I had that, or even, to be honest, even one-on-ones. I've noticed that when you're in person and you have that conversation, one-on-ones are much easier to get the person to open up. And that's one of the advantages of hybrid, is that my team in Auckland, I can go in and I can still meet them for coffee, even though most of the week we're not working. But obviously can't do that with all my team, as much as I'd like to be flown to America every week. So
would you?
No, I wouldn't. I did get to, I did get to meet some of my American team, and I will say, because I'm obviously all in for remote working and it works great, but getting to get over and meet people in person definitely helped build that connection a lot quicker. And it just makes it more casual. Like you're not booking in time to hang out, which kind of erodes the purpose of it to a degree.
Yeah. The thing I've found, and I'm still kind of trying to parse this, so excuse my stream of consciousness here. I'm in Tauranga, I'm in the Auckland office, in theory, once a month. There's been times where I've gone to Auckland and been in the office by myself, which is, poor planning amongst other things on my part. But I would say I work it out about once every 6 weeks. I'm in the office and there's a ton of people there and there's this super high energy day. And that kind of has been feeding that cultural need, the connection with people. Very little work in the scheme of things gets done, but the counterbalance to there's all this connection with people that happens that I think is of more value.
Yeah, I think people as a whole are seeing that, how valuable that team building is. I mean, we all looked at like larger corporates for years of like, you spend all this money on team building for execs and think, oh, what a waste of money. They're just hanging out for the day. I think, at least for me, and might be related to my growth as a leader, or might be related to just remote working. I now see that like, hey, that is super valuable, and that's like time well spent. And trying to get that in a remote and mostly asynchronous team, as we kind of discussed, is difficult. There's some things you can do, like building social elements. James, I know you love the stuff quiz for the team. We don't quite have that, but we have we actually use Donut, which I'm sure you're both familiar with, in Slack, that like sets up meetings. But Donut can also like send like fun little questions every day of like, I think today's was send us a picture of your pet. You can be like, what's your like favorite holiday ever? And it just kind of forces that little bit of like chat in Slack of like, and it's asynchronous again. It's like people just like building a little bit of connection. And the other part is trying to build it into formal meetings. Like a lot of like kind of leadership team stuff that I do, we usually do a round table check-in at the start. We'll do like a 1-word check-in about work and personal life. So how are you feeling about this? How are you feeling about personal life? How are you feeling about work? And it's just a way to like connect with your colleagues that you would probably get if you're in the office and you saw them coming in and they're clearly having a bad day. Or they're in a great mood. And it's just good to know that. It's good to gauge it. It's good to like build that connection. But definitely probably the biggest challenge of remote working for sure. But I've tried things like coffee dates and like having a coffee club in the mornings. James was part of it in another company when we did it, and it kind of works a bit, but then it drops off after a while. Like I think start of pandemic during lockdown it helped because everyone was super starved for social. But after a while, it kind of gets, I'm busy. This feels like not really the best use of my time, and then the numbers drop off. So I don't think that's quite a sustainable solution, but experimentation is key, I guess.
We do the random coffee bot, and it works as long as I'm super intentional about it. And I find I'm usually the one booking the calendar appointment, meaning that, you know, I suspect that a lot of other people are just getting assigned and they're not doing anything with it. So you've got to be quite intentional.
Yeah, I've used it in previous roles and it's not been very good. And especially depending on the size of your company, it's like, oh, I know this person. I talk to them all the time. What's the point of this? Where the team I'm on now, it's, as I say, it's grown rapidly. So I talked about the engineering growth, but as a group, I think the team was 6 or 7 people when I joined. It's now 54. So in terms of like supporting functions and things like that. So that's a lot of people, and I haven't actually met them all. So coffee dates is actually great because I'm like, oh, hey, I've never talked to you before. This is great. Perfect chance to catch up. But yeah, I agree. You have to commit to it. It can't be just like, oh, I'll ignore this calendar invite. Because again, it's prioritization. Social stuff often feels like not the priority. It's like one of those, the classic Eisenhower matrix. It's in that like important but not urgent category. And people just constantly forget to schedule it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is actually such a good point because everything is built around trust, right? And as easy as it is to just throw the word trust out, how do you build trust? It's about establishing a connection with someone, right? Like that's how you do. And how do you do it? By being proactively conscious and by setting up these meetings with your colleagues. And I think if you're in a leadership or management role, it's very, very important for you. Like I am not a manager like you two, but I still kind of like set up like coffee dates with my friends, go out for drinks. Something really cool that my team at BNZ does right now. And this was like, we did a full team reset earlier this year when we actually started the team. So we try to do stuff quiz twice a day, like after a stand up in the morning and then at 3:30 because 30% of our team is in Auckland and we don't see them in person. So it's really nice to kind of like see them twice.
Yeah. And that's a part of the benefit of, I would say, Xero as a whole, or at least the rest of my team being hybrid and not being in the office all the time. It's kind of forced us to think remote. Like we're not like, oh, half of us in the office and everyone else is in the US. Therefore, the US team are like second-class citizens in the team, and we're all remote, so we all like have to treat each other the same. It's not like because I've worked with teams there, like it's split between offices, and it kind of creates a bit of a separation of like us versus them. Like, oh, where was that decision made? Who made that? Where because we're all remote, it forces us all to think in that like, oh, like you can't guarantee anyone's in the office in any single day. And to be honest, days where some of us are in the office, we'll probably still join from our own laptops rather than grabbing a meeting room, which is a bit sad and antisocial, but it just actually makes a better experience for those who are remote. And also meeting rooms are hard to come by at Xero, I will say. It's the other part.
It's the thing, right? Like meetings are really hard, and then like it takes pretty much like 5 minutes, like for the technical setup to get working and all of that stuff. It's actually can be quite hard. I'm talking about disadvantages. One thing that I'm really keen to here is your point of view on work-life balance, because if like half your team is in States and if they're messaging you at like outside your usual 8 to 4 or your 9 to 5, like how do you maintain that work-life balance for yourself, Darragh, so that you're not feeling overburdened?
I mean, it's hard. And I will say that when we first went remote, like fully remote as a world during the pandemic, I definitely didn't handle it very well. I worked probably too many hours and then eventually suffer burnout. So when I tell my team to be careful and not suffer burnout, I can speak from experience. which is helpful. I mean, it wasn't great at the time, but it's helpful to have that life lesson. For me now, just trying to be careful with it. I probably do sometimes do a little bit more than I should, but I try to take that time back. Like if I'm like, hey, you know what? I worked a 10-hour day yesterday. Today I'm going to take a break in the middle of the day and go work out or do whatever. And try balance it like that. The benefit is with the US is that because of the way the time zones work as well, we have like it's 3 hours and then it's their night. So it's not like they're messaging me. And I try use timed messages and things like that with my team. And if I don't use the time message and I get a response, I usually send a grumpy emoji back because I'm not expecting a response. Like I'm very, very vocal about like, hey, you guys work your hours. I think to the point now where it's gone too far, my team are afraid to respond to me after hours, but maybe need to dial that back a bit. But it's a bit just about setting boundaries and expectations, and as a people leader, leading by example of like, hey, I'm not going to work extra hours. Like people who try schedule meetings with me early morning are usually sorely disappointed because I'd say no, and it's not because I'm lazy and refusing to get out of bed. It's usually just because I have to set the boundaries. I also actually teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the morning, so I actually can't be there, which is a great excuse because it's like, oh, actually other people are depending on me, so I can't just move. I can't just go, oh, I'll get up an hour earlier. I'm actually out doing something. But yeah, and people try it all the time. And some people probably don't understand and get grumpy about it, but you know, we just have to set the standards.
Yeah, like it is about setting personal boundaries, right? And being actually disciplined yourself. Like for me, I never book meetings during lunchtime. Luckily everyone that I have worked with is usually in the New Zealand zone. So but I have a personal rule, like never book a meeting between 12 to 1. Like it's just disrespectful in my personal opinion only. But also like I don't book any meetings like before 9, because like I know a lot of my colleagues are dropping their kids off and it's really, really hard, or after 5. And I think I was just saying that it's like for me it is about creating personal boundaries and like being disciplined enough. I don't have Teams or Slack on my phone. I mean, I'm not a manager, no one's reporting to me, so I'm not in that position like you guys where I need to be there for everyone.
I try if I'm on holidays, I like try and I remove at least from my home screen, if not delete it from my phone completely with Slack, because I'm really bad for Slack of check, or have been really bad for checking Slack like it's social media. I try have restraint with that now. The one thing that I find really hard to track as a people lead when we talk about people working outside of hours, it's not people working outside of hours, because as we talked about, part of the benefit of remote work is people can work the hours that suit them. It's people overworking is the part that I'm monitoring for. It's like, hey, have you been working for the last 12 hours, or did you actually go do something nice in the middle of the day? And because we're not in the office, I don't have visibility of that. So it's hard to say sometimes when I see that someone's online after their normal hours or earlier than they normally would be. Like, are you adjusting the hours you're working, or are you actually overdoing it? And that's just part of kind of checking up on people on one-on-ones and setting the standard, because that's all you can do, because people are adults. Like your team, my team are adults. Like I can't police them. I can just give them recommendations, tell them what's expected of them, and then if they're and tell them the folly of trying to overwork and what's going to happen to them in terms of burnout. But they have to make that decision ultimately themselves.
Yeah, and like you said, like if you can lead by example, if all leaders can lead by example, I think that's a better way instead of kind of like coming up with a bunch of rules.
Yeah, and that is leading by example is actually a difficulty with remote working as well, because you're not in the office. You're not seeing that like, hey, everyone, I'm off at 4:00. Like you can't do that. So trying to be the loud leader is kind of a thing you have to do, which feels silly at times, like posting like, hey, everyone, I'm off. It's like, of course they don't care, but like you're doing it purposely to like make them aware of what you're doing.
This was actually so funny. Like one of the startup that I used to work at, I think a lot of people were working remote. So like the time they're going to gym is like off the gym, back from gym, going for a run. And I was like, and I was in the office and I would just like read it and I'll be like, I don't give a shit. But I understand now. I think I understand better now.
It is it is a balance of not making it, because that's the balance I've been trying to figure out of like, I also don't want people feeling they have to report their status to me. Like I want people to just go to the gym or go do whatever they want to do and just do it. I don't care, as long as people who like set your Slack status, so if someone's trying to reach you they can see it, but don't feel you have to report on your whereabouts, because I actually, I have trust that you're doing your work, and beyond that, I don't really care. As long as you're not overworking, like, whatever works best for you is always my approach and belief. Um, so it is a balance of like me kind of setting that example of like, hey, I'm being loud, but also not updating them on everything I'm doing, because I don't. And I have messaged members of my team who've taken that lead and started telling me about everything they're doing, and I'm like, hey, you don't actually need to do this. Like, if you're taking a 2-hour lunch, just do it. Like, you don't need to tell me.
Yeah. I'm probably going off a tangent here now. Sorry, James. But like with going back to asynchronous communication, right? Like one of the disadvantages that I noticed of like when you're in a remote setup is like the communication channels get very, very crowded. And I think it's kind of like people need to learn, like we all need to learn etiquettes for like using Slack properly, like threading. Threading is one of the ways, right? Or if you like you use Teams, in Teams you can actually have headings. So use headings so that you're not kind of like spamming the channel, because otherwise the actual information gets lost. Like it's all about like when someone's walking their dogs, when someone's going to the gym.
Yeah, I agree with it, especially that I kind of had this situation recently where reminding the team about the audience in different channels. Like we have our main team channel, which has all of the various people in our team in it and stakeholders and beyond. So it's not just engineering, and engineers kind of dropping like huge code samples in the channel. But like, hey, can anyone help me with this bug? Which was difficult because I'm like, I want this. It's great that you're doing this cross pod communication, but also it's making people not want to read this channel or follow it because they just assume it's becoming engineering speak. So kind of talking to them like, hey, can you post a summary of what you're asking and then thread the rest of it, and just so people can follow those streams. So yeah, that's a challenge I've seen. But you're right, like there's like Slack fatigue is a real thing. Like there's so much on Slack to keep track of, and I miss stuff like Xero being a big company has a lot, and I've missed some probably relatively important people leadership announcements I should have been across because I'm in like probably 50 channels, I would say.
Yeah,
sorry.
I have a love-hate relationship with Slack. It's sort of, I'm still trying to figure out how I manage it because like I use it socially as well. And so I'll like check Slack and with my coworkers. So I'll check Slack to yarn with someone at night, but also there'll be a message about something. And so I'll like, and there's the problem that you read the message, so it's not going to show up as unread the next morning. So I've got to, set a reminder or then take some action.
Yeah. And I've definitely had to read a Slack message, get really irritated about it, feel really grumpy all night, possibly not even sleep well, stress out about something. And then in the morning, it takes like one exchange with someone and it's sorted because it was just like a miscommunication or something and it's fine. But just because you have to stew on this piece of information overnight, it's not good. So that is something that I also need to put up boundaries around. Like, I don't need to read this message now. Why am I opening this application to do so?
That's it, right? Like, it's like for me, it's all about like self-discipline. A bigger part of it is about self-discipline. Like, there's so many channels, but I am only like, I choose to only be part of like maybe 10 channels, and I can get away with it because I don't have people reporting to me or I'm not in a leadership or management role. So like, I can get away with it. You guys probably can't. But again, like we all have a choice, like which communications channels we really want to be part of, and which, like, I think FOMO, like fear of missing out, is something we all struggle with at a deeper level. So we probably need to introspect why.
Yeah, for me, a huge part of my role is context, though. Like, I need to build context about what's going on in both my teams and the wider org. So not being in channels actually hurts my role. But I completely agree. I'm probably in too many, and it's like, okay, which ones do I actually need to be in? And it probably does come back to FOMO of like, oh, maybe there's a piece of information I'll miss at some point in this channel, but probably missing too much of it because I'm in too many channels at the same time.
Yeah, I go the route, and at some point it will be unsustainable, but every message has to be read in every channel that I'm in, and
I actually go and disable notifications. Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, like, because context switching is quite big, especially if you are in a development or testing role. Like, I need the flow to be able to do my job for what I'm getting paid. And context switching is all those notifications coming in all the time. Like, for me, is very, very taxing.
So something that's become really big at Xero lately, and this is kind of moving away from remote work conversation, but is focus blocks. It's like making like as a company, we've adopted the like, hey, focus blocks are a thing, and respect people's focus blocks, and don't book meetings over them, and turn off your Slack notifications while you're in a focus time. And it seems to be successful. I use them. Probably I'm guilty of sometimes going, oh, I'm just going to catch up on my emails rather than actually focusing during this period. But the concept is great. It's like I'm not responding to every Slack. The other thing of Slack is setting up an SLA with your team of like, this is how quickly I'll respond to your Slack messages. Because I think we all have this instant panic of like, oh, read messages in Slack, I better read it and respond as fast as I can. We're just saying like, hey, I might not reply for 2 to 3 hours, depending what's going on. I might not always get back to you as quickly. If it's urgent, maybe mark it as urgent. And trying to work that way. I've seen, this is an idea I've seen and thought that's a great idea and not implemented very well myself, but I've definitely seen other leaders use it quite effectively.
Yeah. This is such a fascinating conversation, I have to say. Darragh, will have you back and we'll just talk about Slack versus Teams and like all the etiquettes of using Slack and all these communications.
Yeah. One of the things I will add is that one of our recent starters, as she was onboarding, put together a document about Slack etiquette and, what are the important channels to be in, how do we communicate, all that sort of stuff. And it's been an excellent resource. Like having that stuff codified is really good.
Brilliant.
Yeah. It comes back to kind of, we talked about documentation earlier, but it comes back to writing it down solves so many problems. Like so many of my problems, I feel like my team leads are sick of me just saying this to them. Like they come to me with problems and my answer is almost always talk to them or write it down. Because that's often the solution to most of our problems. We just can't see it. In fact, I was having an issue and my boss said the same thing to me, and I realized it's it's just writing it down because most of our roles come down to communication, and like async it is documentation is the best way for that because it's creating an artifact that's there. But it's sometimes it's hard to see that when you're in the midst of it. Like, oh, if I just wrote this down, this problem would go away.
Camy, I cut you off while I think you were segueing into a conclusion.
Oh, no. I was just kind of like, I think my conclusion was that we need to have a dedicated episode to talk about like all these like communication channel etiquettes at work. Like how to use Slack properly, how to use Teams properly. Because I think it's directly related to our performance and, context switching, not being able to like multitask and all of that stuff. I think people would love, and we would love to have you back, Darragh. Like you've got so many ideas on that.
Happy to be back. The only caveat I'll add to that is I'm a firm believer if teams do what's best for the team. So there's probably no right answer to any of those things. We can offer some suggestions of what we've seen work, but I think every team, much like the individual figuring out their ways of working with remote culture, I think teams have to adapt to what's best for their way of working, which matters on the work they're doing, the tech they're using, and the individuals in the team as well.
Yeah, like and that's the entire point of the team and the individuals having autonomy within the organization, right? And I think Xero is probably one of the places that's leading like the conversations on team autonomy and individual autonomy across New Zealand from what I've heard. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Like teams and individuals have enormous autonomy, but from Xero giving them that autonomy allows me to kind of proactively give it as well, because as a people leader, I have a huge trust model. Like I'm micromanagement is my worst nightmare of having to do it because I don't want to know all of the details. I want to just be there to help guide and support and coach my team, and then just let them use their best judgment. That's why it's a knowledge-based industry, and it's why we hire high-skilled engineers, is because their knowledge.
Exactly, they know how to do their job. What else did we had in our document? James, because I'm pretty sure I've taken you guys on tangents, too many tangents.
No, I think it's been a good conversation. There's a few other things, but we're coming close to time.
Oh, that's okay.
So I don't want to sort of drag us down too much. We talked kind of about the casual conversation stuff. One thing, there's a couple of things that we found useful. We talked about the stuff quiz. There's probably people who don't know what the stuff quiz is.
My attempt to introduce the stuff quiz into my team was disastrous, because the US team were like, what is this thing? Why are all the questions about New Zealand? And the kind of audience dropped off quickly. I should try resurrect it with maybe renewed enthusiasm, but yes, the stuff quiz, James, you're probably best. You're the stuff expert in probably New Zealand. You can explain
you go to stuff.co.nz, they have a twice daily quiz. I don't work for them, I'm not sponsored, but it is a neat thing to do with your team. We do it every day after stand up, and it just kind of it's a way for especially the introverts who don't want to do a random coffee chat to be engaged in something.
Yep.
And you find out things about people. The classic. There's a question in the quiz about Agatha Christie novels, and someone pipes up with, "I've read all of those," and it's like, huh.
It is so great. Like, so many people have so much niche knowledge on so many topics. Like I just find it out when we do stuff quiz. So my team switches it up. We also do like Tradle, if you guys have done Tradle. So and
I like Tradle.
Worldale, like it's like a map of a country, and then you have to guess it. We also do like mini crossword puzzle. So we try to switch it up so that we're not stuck in the same model and getting a bit siloed. Yeah.
The struggle I suffer with my teams with this is that time zone issue, because we have so little time together. Although like recognizing the social element's important, it's actually just trying to get a meeting that everyone could attend with a reasonable time is difficult. So that's why I kind of gone with those async kind of questions in the chat that work reasonably well. Definitely not as good. You definitely learn a little bit less, but you still learn a bit about people. I know a lot about people's cats and dogs and barbecue meats and different things like that.
Yeah, I might try and I like that donut random question. I've got it in one of my social channels, and I might try and bring it into the real thing as well. I like it.
Yeah. It's a hard one though, because not everyone will participate. Like at least with a call, you've got the whole team there, so the introverts are kind of pulled into it a bit more. But hey, you can't force everyone to socialize.
That's quite a nice segue, because like James, you mentioned it, and Darragh, you've just mentioned it. Like, how do you find introverts versus extroverts, like managing them remotely?
I mean, the one benefit about extroverts and the asynchronous document communication we mentioned earlier, it kind of brings things to a more level playing field. Like extroverts classically have better luck in design meetings when everyone's there and they can push their opinion forward and talk about it. Where moving into asynchronous communication allows the introverts to push their opinions forward without kind of having to deal with that social pressure. There's still social pressure to posting a comment. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't exist, but they're at least in a better position to think through their answer and kind of say what they're trying to say. So that's helpful from my perspective. I will say that video calls with introverts can be a bit more awkward than like grabbing coffee with them. Although it can be slightly harder to get them talking, it's maybe easier. Video calls with people, because it's like a formal meeting, always has a little bit of an awkward element, and especially with introverts. But you figure out what works for the individual, what gets them talking, and some of them don't want to catch up every week. They're happy to catch up every 2 weeks, and like they'll come to you if they've got a problem, and you build that trust model with them. But yeah, I wouldn't say I've got that nailed, but that's kind of what my approach at the moment. Do you have any look at that, James, with your team?
One thing that's kind of come out of the blue a little bit is, so we have a deploy train process where we kind of, if you have more than one person deploying to production at once, you kind of go together. And so they'll jump on a Slack huddle, start the deploy process, and then our unit tests take about 15 minutes, which is bad, but there's another thing. But they're in a room and they're just, you're talking about work and the work you're doing, but then there's kind of this point where you just sort of make conversation for a bit, and that's actually ended up being quite a useful kind of, there's a reason you have to be here. It's not a forced chit chat. But at the same time, there's room for that, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that kind of like stuff helps a lot. I think Huddle, the voice only Huddle is great for like chatting like that over things. I also have I have a new pod that got stood up about 2 months ago. So it was like 6 new engineers, fresh to Xero, all remote, never met each other, and they did a lot of mob programming to start, and that's been hugely successful to getting that team boots like started. Like kudos to my team lead with that team, because he orchestrated that. Like that wasn't something I pushed on him. I was actually on holidays when it happened. Good leadership, right? Start a whole new team and then go on holidays. But that's been hugely successful. They're like working really, really well together, because they immediately, while knowledge growing, they also created that cultural and social element with each other, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I don't think so. I started peer programming during COVID, and it was kind of like we were forced to. But when I actually started doing peer programming with my colleagues, it's been the best thing I've ever done, because now like if I'm in the office, you're both just looking at the same screen. But if you're remote, I have control of my screen and the other person has control of their screen. So it's quite productive. And I really enjoy pair programming over Teams or Slack, like remotely instead of like being in person. And I think you're absolutely right, Derek. Like pair programming and mock programming is one way to kind of like build that culture, and especially introverts, because majority of the developers, like people in technical roles, they can be a little bit introverted. So it's quite nice to kind of like for them to get out and be able to connect.
Yeah, I will say that team kind of elected to then not do their next sprint as a mob programming. They're like, hey, we want to go off and do our own stuff for a while. They could still come back and mob program every now and then.
Yeah.
But I think there's a balance to strike there. That's not like, okay, everything you do now is peer program. It's like, hey, let's peer program on some stuff to build that, but then like leave, because engineers, especially introverts, but especially just with the builder mentality, I've had it, like I used to have myself, like put on a pair of headphones and just smash out some code is a beautiful thing. And you don't want to pull that away from engineers because it is like one of their great joys.
Yeah, and I totally understand that, because some people can then end up in a codependency model where, you know, like for every work that you do, now you have to pull in someone, and that can be quite terrifying. Are we good to move into the trick question segment? Because I have a question for Derek.
Okay.
Go.
I think you briefly mentioned this already. Like switching on cameras, right? Like switching on cameras during meetings. So I've been in situations where people, I mean, they're still in the country. I know. They hardly ever come to office, and they never switch on their cameras. Like it never switch on their cameras. And I've had so many candid conversations, like with my people leads and other people leads. It's quite a tricky thing to kind of like give an opinion on. Like I totally understand. Like what are your views on like camera etiquettes during remote working?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I don't think I've got a view that is broad across the spectrum, because it's definitely context dependent, because there is definitely legitimate reasons why people don't want to turn on cameras. One of my colleagues today was sick, so she didn't turn on a camera.
Totally.
Perfectly acceptable. Like, hey, you don't want everyone seeing you sick. But there is some people, who are uncomfortable with turning on the camera, and it's really about, for myself as a people leader, talking to that person and trying to understand the reasoning behind it. And yes, it's an awkward conversation, but I think part of leadership is having awkward conversations with people, and just trying to understand and unwind if it's legitimate, or it's like actually it's because I'm off making coffee when I'm in the meeting, or I just like trying to understand it, but also try to talk them through the positives of having the camera. Like it helps to create a connection. Like we read people's faces or read their emotions. It's one of the benefits of working virtually, that if we'd had a pandemic 15 years beforehand, working culture would be very different now. Like being able to read people's facial emotions and kind of build that connection with them is super important to teamwork. It's super important to when you're talking to people. But hey, if you're super comfortable with this for whatever reason, we can obviously figure it out, but also be aware that every meeting you join, someone's probably going to ask why you've got your camera on. So be prepared to answer.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Do you have any views on that James? Do you?
That's an interesting point, because I have noticed that I often find myself in meetings where I can't get a word in. But I'm a facially expressive person, and often that is a cue to other people in the meeting. I'll get, James, why did you raise your eyebrows at that? Why did you, why are you frowning? That sort of thing. And it's genuinely useful from that regard. And I'll watch people's faces for that.
It's super important. I've been using it to cue you up today, James. So I keep pausing for long periods because I can see you're about to say something. Maybe you're just not. Maybe you're yawning. I don't know. But I think it's really important. There's also another thing that's another thing that we've been working on at Xero, which was turning off your own camera, as in, sorry, not your camera, but your own video of yourself. So turning off your own camera. So this is like a new ways of working thing that Xero's being brought in some people to work with us with. And to be honest, initially I was like a bit skeptical. I was like, oh, my own camera on, what a big deal. It's not like I spend the whole meeting staring at myself. But actually, it is really freeing to not be able to see yourself when you're having conversations. In fact, being on this call and being able to see myself is distracting again, because I wasn't able to for so long. And I think it actually helps with meeting fatigue, I've noticed as well, strangely. I think it's because that cognitive something or other going on of being able to see myself the whole time. And you said dissidence, but that's not what it is. So like I definitely recommend that as an option as well, turning off being able to see yourself. But yeah, back to the main point of people with their cameras off, try to understand why they have them off, but definitely encourage them to be on. I think it has benefits to the remote working, but be respectful and understanding that people have them off. And then there's just times where people are like, I'm currently looking after my son. Yeah, fine. That's understandable. It's more if someone's making a habit of it, or
I think
it's also going to be seen as disrespectful. Like I'm just turning off my camera all the time in a meeting. Make them aware that is seen as disrespectful. Are you sure that's what your intention, what you're trying to get across?
Yeah, I kind of feel, and this is just my personal opinion, I kind of feel like now that we are all embracing the remote working culture, like this is inevitable, this is happening, this is how we work in 2022 and going forward, I think we, like majority of the organizations, need to have some sort of like baseline standards of kind of like all of these things, like asynchronous communication, online meetings, like how to do these things. But it's like we will probably get there in a few years once we've been doing this for a few years. Like it's still too early.
Yeah, I mean, maybe for sure, but I kind of come back to that. I think individual teams need to figure out what works for best for them. So I think on a macro level, we need to help each of our teams to define these things, and writing it down. Coming back to that, just write it all down.
Yeah, but even just like us having this conversation today is just like creating that awareness and kind of like giving people some pointers, like these are some things that work for you and me and could work for the teams as well. It's all part of building the remote working culture.
Yeah.
This was such a great chat, Darragh. Honestly.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thanks. It was great. I enjoyed it. Hopefully I made some sort of sense halfway through at least.
100%.
No, that was great. We really appreciate you taking the time. Wonderful to see you again, as always. And Camy, thanks as always for being an amazing host.
You too, James.
And thank you everyone for watching. I hope this has been useful to you. Hashtag like and subscribe. Tell your friends. All that sort of shenanigans. I'm not a very good marketer. Sorry.
You got it.
Yeah.
Cool. You so much.
All right. We'll see you in a few weeks for the next one.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thanks, James. Bye.
All right. See yous.